Welcome back to another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio. I am your host, Royce White, and we are here at Free People Radio in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The day is March 6th, the year of our Lord 2023, and this is episode 12. I hope everybody had an opportunity.
13.
Say it.
13.
This is episode 13. Thank you, Patrick. I appreciate it. Episode 13. I think I don't want to say the number 13 because I'm kind of superstitious that way. But hey, episode 13. Thank you to all the new subscribers. We're growing fast. We're on all the major audio platforms. A lot of people listening to the podcast and downloading the podcast from all around the world, which is really encouraging and exciting for us here at Free People Radio. Exciting for me. I'm glad to be able to have my own platform and be able to talk on a consistent basis, weekly basis. We are on all major video platforms as well. YouTube, Rumble, we're backed up on BitChute. Still looking into Twitch and Odyssey, so those things will be coming in the near future, hopefully. If you didn't get an opportunity, please go back and watch Friday's Family and Friends episode with the great Dr. Scott Jensen. I thought he and I had a wonderful conversation, and he proved himself to be a very interesting and down-to-earth doctor, as well as former gubernatorial candidate and just an overall good person. I thought that conversation was very interesting and civil and on the up and up. And a lot of people have given a lot of good feedback. So if you didn't get a chance to, go back and watch Friday's interview with Dr. Scott Jensen. Like, subscribe, leave a comment. And that goes for the show in general. Please like, subscribe, and comment. If you're in the chat, I see we get a good number of people in the chat when these premiere on YouTube. Please drop a comment in the regular comment section. Let's fight the algorithms and get this plane up to altitude. Any other housekeeping? Not that I know of. The guest episode this week is going to be out of this world. I may, in fact, have to add a guest episode on Wednesday night, and if we do, I won't be able to tell you that before it happens. So on Wednesday's episode, we may just pop up, and you'll see that we've added a guest for Wednesday's episode as well. And it'll be tied into current events if that guest does end up that guest episode does end up happening. It will certainly tie into current events and news. Friday's guest is already lined up, and it's gonna be major, colossal. I can't even say any more than that. Just know that Friday's Family and Friends guest episode is gonna be the best yet, for sure, the best yet. Outside of that, today I want to talk about something that came up in the Dr. Scott Jensen video or interview around this idea of moral hazard. And it also popped up in my earlier interview with Dr. Chris Martinson. And I wanted to expound on this moral hazard idea as a way to tie us into a greater discussion around the will of man, man's will, human will, and the problems with it today, as I see it. And so, moral hazard is one of these financial terms. It comes from the financial sector. It basically says that there are certain mechanisms, certain practices that really eliminate the incentive to not make risky decisions, right? It sort of socializes risk. And in financial terms, that's become very common to talk about in terms of the Fed, the Federal Reserve's monetary policy. The Fed kind of created a moral hazard for Wall Street and the big finance by backstopping it with American taxpayer money and bailing out the institutions that needed to be bailed out when trouble came. And this was really big during the 2009 financial crisis and the housing market crash, which Dr. Scott Martinson laid out in our interview together about 2 Family and Friends episodes back. But it continued on after the 2009 financial crash or crisis, and the Fed and monetary policy has behaved that way in large part for years to follow. even up till now. I mean, the Fed is still operating in the same kind of vacuum with alongside our DC politicians and bailing out institutions and risky financial behavior. And, you know, I think of this moral hazard idea as being much broader than the financial sector. I think that our society as a whole has engaged in a sort of moral hazard that has incentivized risky or non what seems to be behavior that has no risk socially, culturally, and that idea of moral hazard is pervasive. It's definitely pervasive in our corporations, but more importantly, it's pervasive in our communities. And so today, I wanted to go back to some fundamental first principles historically and how we got where we are, because we're this you know this our society is crumbling. And our society is on the precipice. It's on the brink of total destruction, not only with nuclear war, but sort of a self-implosion, a lack of ability for people to have meaningful, logical conversations, to problem solve, to critically think, to see beyond their own set of presuppositions and judgments around other people, themselves, reality itself. Uh, we're in a very tumultuous place. Turmoil is afoot. War is afoot. We're on the war path. World War III it's really already began. I mean, we're effectively in a war with Russia and China now, which is a herald of World War III for sure. But those conflicts could obviously escalate very quickly, and in doing so, the ramifications of the war we're in would grow as well. Um, but we have to go back and understand where this whole thing went off track. And I always talk about the four heresies of the West, or you've heard me talk about the four heresies of the West, or the four ideological horsemen of the apocalypse. And those are good. Those are good intellectual, metaphorical concepts to have to frame where we are today from an ideological or philosophical standpoint. But even more importantly, let's pinpoint the Industrial Revolution as a key mark in history. And to pinpoint the Industrial Revolution, we have to go back and pull on our biblical principles or our biblical teachings. And if you go right back to Genesis, I mean, right in the beginning of the Old Testament, God lays out what curse will befall Adam and Eve because of their disobedience, because of their that original sin. And in that, it says men will sweat by the toil of their brow, and women will have pain in birth and childbearing. I talked a couple episodes ago when I spoke about women in Marxism, and it turned into an episode that was more predicated around Black women being used as a cultural motif to forward global policy and global agenda and this sort of Marxist ideology, along with many others. But the crisis of femininity, which I think there is a very broad crisis of femininity across racial lines, age, culture, nations, etc. The crisis of femininity stems back to a failure of masculinity. And that failure of masculinity was, we all wanted to give God the finger. Men wanted to give God the finger. I mean, we've been working on it since the word go. But when we hit the Industrial Revolution, we decided to take things up a notch. We decided to put things on steroids, let's say, and giving God the finger. And it had been growing, right? I mean, you had this secularism that came out of the Renaissance era and post-Renaissance Europe, and it grew, right? It grew. These ideologies that would actually become a substitute for faith in God and Christianity and spirituality and all of these things. It was growing. But when we hit the Industrial Revolution, something different took place altogether. Basically, we said, we're going to automate work. We're going to use technology and science and math and knowledge to make our work easier. And in making our work easier, what we've really done is we've found a way to give ourselves more time to sin. And then also we've doubled down in that area and found a way to socialize the sin. And we see a sort of trajectory from the Industrial Revolution to this big tech movement or this big tech wave where um, we've all but socialized all of our sin. All of our sin. And the more we automate, the more technology and artificial intelligence and all these things bring us more and more convenience. We've basically socialized sin, which is a real example of moral hazard at a cultural and social level. But the Industrial Revolution is a key moment because in the Industrial Revolution we said, hey, um, we got a shortcut. we have a great shortcut. There's plenty else that we could be doing with our time, and it's an interesting moment as well because we could have we could have certainly used science and technological advancement or innovation to grant ourselves more time during the day to pray and to become even more spiritually enlightened and wise and grounded, but we didn't. And I think in this example of the Industrial Revolution, we have to ask a question about man's will. And I think people, certainly people who aren't Christian, have trouble understanding the nature of sin, the fundamental nature of sin. And most people judge the world or reality based on suffering. This is one of those Judeo-Buddhist Noah Yuval Harari philosophical viewpoints that reality always reduces down to suffering. That suffering is the best metric of reality. And in that, usually they try and resign from society altogether and eliminate all the suffering. This is a fundament. This is why I use the term or have used the term anti-Jew, because this is a very anti-Jewish idea. And Noah Yuval Harari is Jewish by his own claim, but people claim to be Christian and Muslim and other things as well. But they show in their actions and in their beliefs and in the way they think that they're anything but. And that's a widespread, pervasive problem. But this sort of Judeo-Buddhist mentality says that we can continue to use science and technology and innovation to rid ourselves of all the suffering in the world. And this is dangerous on two accounts. One, you can't reduce suffering, right? Angst and despair are emergent. These are emergent qualities. I mean, we're going to get down to philosophical first principles today. Angst, which brings anxiety. Angst is the root philosophical term for anxiety, and despair, which is sometimes regarded as the root philosophical word for depression, but really despair is a thing in and of itself. These two qualities are emergent, meaning that they always emerge. It's baked into the human condition. There is no way to supersede the fundamental fact that we will all live and die. There's life and death for all of us. None of us are God. None of us are immortal. And what Christianity tries to solve, or what the Abrahamic faith tries to solve, or what Jesus Christ tries to solve, is to give us a hope or a hope and in many ways a charity and a grace to deal with our immortality here in the world. And the way to do that is to be faithful and eventually be granted immortality in the eternal, in the spiritual world. This is a very, very profound development. Now, you had other cultures that talk about the afterlife, and obviously the Egyptians had beliefs about the afterlife, and many cultures have developed beliefs about the afterlife, but none of them really embraced suffering the way that Christianity did, right? And I think over the last 1,000 years, for sure, maybe working on 1,300 years or so since the Renaissance, but I think the abnegation of suffering as an important or even essential quality of the human condition to understand has taken us way, way off track. There is no getting out of suffering. There is no escaping suffering. There is being able to accept suffering. There are ways to be able to cope with suffering. Um, and many of us Christians find that the best way to deal with that, or the let's just say the best way to deal with that, is to have some type of uh, faith practice, and to ask God to help with that. And look, the tough part, and this was in large part why many people lost their faith, is because we sort of think of faith as a zero-sum game, right? We sort of think that everything that we ask for, everything that we want, everything we want to avoid should come to fruition. There's sort of an arrogance and a narcissism and a self-absorption, a self-centeredness in human beings, I would say natural inclination towards life. And which is why in the Bible it says it's easier for a rich man to pass through the eye of a needle than it is for, it's easier for a camel to pass through the eye of a needle than for a rich man to get into heaven. I mean, it's not easy to get into heaven. It is, it's hard. And I think a lot of people abnegated their faith, or, they just say to hell with it because it is difficult. But you got to understand, and I love when AJ talks about grace and charity and all things being aimed at returning humans to God's grace and his glory. It's a profound idea, because if you think about it, we are all being tested. I mean, we are being tested. I mean, free will is a beautiful thing, but it is a test. It's a test. Any free will is a test on an individual. But I certainly think, from a Christian standpoint, our free will is a test for us to demonstrate faith. And in demonstrating faith, we make ourselves worthy of God's grace and charity. And to know God and to love God is it's a special thing. Somewhere in there, we wanted to give God the finger. And it's really strange to me to see all these people come up with all these ideas, like their original ideas, about how the world can be fixed, right? But they never really address these root causes. They never really tell you a definitive answer about things such as despair and angst and suffering themselves. And I wonder how long the common man, the everyday person, is going to buy in to this technological, scientific propaganda or narrative. I mean, this is getting right down to the heart of the matter. Science, you could say that science is trying to sell the best way to die slow. And Christianity is trying to sell the only way to die righteous. Two totally different stories, two totally different narratives. The narrative of Christ, the narrative of any prophet that was persecuted in his namesake, is usually a quick death. I mean, most of them die, ahead of schedule, but they die righteous. And even if you don't believe in the word, even if you don't believe in God or you don't believe in the Bible, you have to see that narrative, that archetype of an individual is much closer to goodness, what we would define as goodness, than the opposite. And we've socialized. I mean, this is the will of man. What I'm discussing today is the will of man. What is the will of man? Sin is a matter of the will first, and then your actions secondarily. And we tend to forget that, even as Christians. But the broader society has been sold a narrative of propaganda that says all goodness or evil, all good or evil, all of human society is based on action. I mean, this is a fundamental schism of philosophical, ideological, and spiritual first principles. Good and bad is not based on actions. It's based on the will, right? You ever heard the phrase intent is 9/10 of the law? Well, a lot of people say possession is 9/10 of the law, but I would say that there's great merit to intent being 9/10 of the law. That's why when you have a court case and you go before the judiciary or a judicial process, they always factor in motive. What was happening? What was going on? What led to this? Right? And if there is a clear, if there is a reason, the reason of somebody's actions is always factored into the final judgment. And even in the judicial system, in some respects, we drop the ball around intent and motive and things like that, which is a product of man trying to square a circle around judgment that man can't square. Um, let God judge, right? Our prison system is our justice system is way out of whack, and it really disturbs me to be in a conservative Christian movement where we shill for the rule of law so often and so vigorously, because our legal system is no good representation of Christian conservative values or a good representation of fairness or justice. It's just not. I mean, it's just not. I mean, the whole thing is crony capitalism. And there's another moral hazard. I mean, I could go down the line of institutions or domains or industries or, different governing bodies, governing agencies. And I could talk about moral hazard all day long. And you look at our justice system as a prime example, just organically just came to my mind, the justice system. Moral hazard. We want truth and peace, but you can't have truth or peace without justice. And justice is not easy to come by, right? And life it moves quick. You get a man today, he's enraged, somebody I don't know, molested his child. And he gets a gun and he kills the guy or kills the woman or whatever the case may be. And society demands that we have judgment now, fast, speedy, habeas corpus, right? But all of these things may have been moral hazard. I mean, when you really look at where we are today and where we say we want to be, we have to be willing to, we have to have the courage to examine all of it. The Constitution gives us great insight, gives us great indication. The Constitution is a document laid out completely from a Christian worldview, despite all these deist claims that people want to make, right? The Constitution was written by, the Bill of Rights, the Declaration of Independence was written by about 4 deists, 4 people who claimed to be deists, and the rest were Christians for the most part. The document lays out how to use free will as a mechanism to develop a nation that had the best shot at facing the adversity of industrial revolution with a remedy of an agrarian faith-based lifestyle, an individual agrarian faith-based lifestyle. That's what the Constitution lays out. It says the bigger that things get, the bigger institutions get, the impulse leans toward the socialization of sin, the convenience of man, the automation of work, the ability to have more time in the day with idle hands that ultimately do the devil's bidding. This is what our Constitution lays out. And it's especially offensive to me because Black people have been used as a battle axe against the legitimacy or basis of the United States Constitution altogether. But it comes from people who have no real understanding of broader cultural, social, spiritual, philosophical first principles, such as moral hazard. And so when we went to the Industrial Revolution came and we said, here's the steam engine. Okay, now here's the automobile. Okay, now here's the telephone. Here's the, combustible engine. Okay, here's electricity. Okay, here, all of these things that made life very convenient. The nature of man or the impulse of man was to bring these super institutions into existence, to socialize and solidify that level of convenience. I mean, this brings me great existential terror. I mean, even myself personally at night, I think a lot of my anxiety exists from thinking about um, just how far we've left the path, like how far we've moved off of the path that we were intended to be on. I mean, from God early on, I mean, that original sin, then from Christ, and then this industrial revolution in America. I mean, we've been afforded all these opportunities. I mean, it just bothers me, the arrogance of man, the arrogance of us to be given all of this indication, all of this help, all of this knowledge, all of this wisdom, and the ability to choose through free will, to choose a path of righteousness, and yet we constantly spit on it. I think this should keep everybody up at night. I know a lot of you are probably listening going, what is this guy even talking about today? I'm talking about the human will. You know, our sin is a matter of the will first and our action secondarily. What does our will aim at? And part of what brought me to this conversation, or had me thinking about this over the weekend, was obviously Dr. Scott Jensen and I had a moment where we spoke about pro-life versus pro-choice and the abortion issue, and it being used as a political wedge issue, as well as being a serious spiritual and cultural issue. And I think when you really get down to the bone, there are no political, spiritual, or cultural issues. It's all one issue. What is the will of man? You know, what is our will aimed at? You know, there are no groups of issues, really. There's only one issue. The issue is, are we righteous or not? And many people, again, this separation of church and state is one of those info wars right from the beginning. Early heresy, right in line with an industrial revolution, right in line with the post-enlightenment, ideology. So no, the government's supposed to be over here and your faith is supposed to be over here. And ultimately, I understand the argument. Like intellectually, I actually can square that circle, because if you really know God, if you really love God, if you really want to obey God, if you have to be governed to do it, is it even genuine? Is it even authentic, right? If you have to be forced to follow God, I don't even know if that's really following. It's certainly not faith. I mean, you can't have faith without that test. The test of faith itself is what legitimizes the ability to actually say that you have faith in God or that you love God. So it almost, and when you get down to that level, at that granular level, philosophically from first principles, you can see where in creating us, God had no choice but to give us free will. That was the only fundamental way it could be set up where we could actually prove, or even, I wouldn't say prove, but could even demonstrate love. You can't demonstrate love without free will. If I force you to love me at gunpoint, is that love? If I force you to love me at the tip of a sword, is that love? If I force you to love me by, making your love contingent on whether or not you eat, have a roof over your head, or whatever else may be, is that love? And so in that, you could even see where God entering into history and allowing man to discover technology, science, innovation the way we have, is an attempt to further the scope of that testing ground so that we can demonstrate that faith and that love. And we can do that. And technology isn't the problem. Science isn't the problem. The will of man is the problem. We could certainly use technology and science to give ourselves more time to love God, to obey God, to worship. And even I have a problem with this. And, you know, it's funny because last week there was a conversation that popped up at one of my lunch meetings about Muslims and the way Muslims pray and them praying 5 times a day. And I just thought, you know, it's so strange. You know, if how many times a day do we pray as Christians? How many times a day do we pray as Jews? And if not 5, why? I mean, and there's no magic. I mean, to the Muslims and Islam, obviously, there's reason behind the number 5, but um, just in general, we have so much time during the day. It just got me to thinking about my own prayer life, and you know, just how far we've come technologically, scientifically, and we the proposition is or the presupposition is that we couldn't have done this if we were more Christian, if we were more spiritual, if we were more faithful. That the two are diametrically opposed, science and God. It can't be. I mean, the early science came from the church. The early science, a lot of early science came from the Catholic Church, came from scientists who were funded by the Catholic Church. So I don't think that the wedge is really between God and science. I think man's will and man's ambition to use science to bridge the gap between himself and God, where he challenges the authority of God or the will of God, is where your heresy is. And that is widespread throughout society. It's widespread throughout our civilization. And sometimes when when you venture away from the road of righteousness that far, the test changes. I mean, we have it pretty good right now. You know, I get it. There's suffering, and people listen to this and they'll go, oh, well, you know, you get to sit in some warm, cozy studio in front of a microphone and a lot of computer technology that even allows you to talk this way. And, you know, I get it. I get it. There's a lot of people out there who are suffering a lot. I'm grateful to God for my health, and many days I wonder if I even deserve it. And I think it's rightful that Christians and people who believe in God wonder if they deserve the things that they have. So I get it. People are going through a lot in the world, but it could be worse. For some people, it couldn't be much worse. For some people, stage 4 liver cancer, just diagnosed today, and all they can do is pray to God that He gives them comfort in their last days, and that, you know, they are accepted into the kingdom of heaven. I get it. So there are tragedies out there, but for many of us, if we're being honest with ourselves, for many of us, we have it pretty good. We have it pretty good. The test isn't that stark. It's just not. And even more importantly for our institutions, the test is not that stark. I mean, I watched a video this morning. I posted it on Twitter, where a young girl, couldn't have been more than 4 years old, was in a room full of adults, and she was being sat on a chair, and there was what looked to be a transgender man, transgender black man, big black man too. Dude must have been 6'3", just solid. I mean, maybe I'm just reading into that because, I mean, juxtaposed to a 4-year-old girl, so everybody looks big to a 4-year-old toddler. But this guy is basically, I want to say, simulating a lap dance of sorts, and the adults in the room are all cheering and clapping. It's had to be about 50 adults in the room. Transgender giving a 4-year-old girl a lap dance. And, you know, we're pretending that the call to faith is hard, difficult. Okay, I get it. I mean, it's hard to be faithful. It's a constant test. The best of them had trouble. Moses, Jacob, Isaac, Abraham, even Christ, was faced with temptation. I get it. I get it. But really, I mean, how long are we going to use this claim of difficulty to justify blatant and overt corruption, wickedness, evil spiritedness? How long? How long do we think we'll be allowed to? Right. I mean, and that's the elephant in the room. The real elephant in the room is that there is a clock. We all know we're on it, whether it's as an individual in your life, or it's as a community, or as mankind. And we, during this industrial revolution, during this scientific, innovative era, we've taken that question of time. This is Heidegger, right? This is one of those Trojan horses where Martin Heidegger goes, being in time. And Being in Time is a very good book. I mean, he goes right to the heart of it. He asked the question right away. I mean, kick out all the other first principles. We got to sort this time issue out, right? Being in Time. Being and Time. That's a book that people should go read. But when you think about what it actually does, it sort of creates this emphasis on time, that time and space are what dictate reality. And in many ways they do, but it doesn't account for the eternal. Even from a philosophical standpoint, that sort of delegitimizes God and the eternal. And when we think about it that way, we don't know how much time we have. Time's not the most important thing, but we all know there's a clock. And there is a clock for all of us. And there is a clock as a collective. And what we've done is we've used that clock, that existential clock, to justify more corruption, more wickedness. Say, the will of man. And you hear it all the time. I mean, here's one of the basic cultural euphemisms that people use here in America, but in the West, in the modern society, to just, it's just business. Isn't that a common term? It's just business. You hear it all the time. It's just business. It's business. Business isn't personal. Business isn't personal is meant to say that business isn't spiritual, that you can separate business from the spiritual. And that's what we've become. We've become a country and a society that tries to separate business from the spiritual. This is dangerous. I mean, this isn't dangerous. This is suicidal spiritually. It's become the norm. It's become the way of the West. It's become the way of the world. And we went first. When it comes to the Industrial Revolution, in the West, we went first. In Europe and then here in America. The West went first in terms of industry, and everybody else followed. And now we're in a Mexican standoff with two nations that basically say, hey, who can play better? Us or you? We'll see. Maybe we're at war in the South China Sea soon. Kinetic war, full-blown kinetic war with the Chinese, with the CCP. Maybe we're already in a full-blown war with Russia, but maybe that war escalates in the months to come. Maybe we go to nuclear war. I mean, these things are actually on the table. And it troubles me to look out at the world and see what people have time for in the world, given these propositions. The proposition of nuclear war, the proposition of world war, the proposition of biological war, the proposition of information war. Even the information war alone as a proposition you would think would bring an entirely different daily sort of interaction from people. But it doesn't. It doesn't bring different interaction. It's not urgent. These matters aren't urgent. Now, the thing I'm hopeful about, the thing that I'm optimistic about, is I don't think you need everybody all at once to join hands and lock arms to change the momentum. Now, the final destination is for God to say, and the final destination is for us to hopefully enter in the gates of heaven through Christ. But we can change the momentum. I mean, the board is not set. I'm not one that believes this is all predetermined. The will of man is the great test. The will of man is the great test of God's love. The will of man is the great testing ground of God's love, of grace and charity. I honestly believe that. That's why I have trouble with Revelation. That's why, and some people will say that this is heresy, or some people will say that this isn't biblically accurate. But there are a lot of 501c3 Christians out there. Just put that on the table. A lot of people that don't want to render unto Caesar, that look at Christianity as just business. And there's great, great moral hazard in that. And we see that over time, what the church has come to stand for and represent in society has been watered down, undermined, and delegitimized through corruption within the church that stems back to not wanting to pay your taxes. You can't speak about a grown black man giving a 4-year-old toddler, a 4-year-old girl, a lap dance because it's a political issue. And if you do, then you won't be 501c3 tax exempt. That would make the church in on it. And those are the churches that are conservative, that actually just refuse to enter into politics because of the 501c3 tax exempt status. Not to mention all the woke churches that actually promote this as an okay thing. And there's an increasing number of woke LGBTQ churches. So even that's stratified into two groups. I'm talking about the real conservative churches who know that it's an issue, who know that that's a problem and may speak on it in their congregation, but ultimately they want to stay out of the politics when it comes time to elect leaders who will or will not change those laws or that cultural circumstance. I mean, we got transgender men. We got transgender men giving lap dances to 4-year-olds. And Patrick here just told me that my Twitter's suspended. I'm going to go here and verify this right now because I posted this video this morning. And, well, it doesn't say I'm suspended on here, but regardless, it's not outside the scope of imagination that I would be suspended for saying, fuck these people, right? They call me an extremist. I'm a religious extremist. I'm a Christo-fascist. I'm a darling of the alt-right or the far right or Nazis or white nationalism or white supremacy. We're extremists. Me, Steve Bannon. We're the extremists. And we have grown adults. We have grown men and women in a room cheering and clapping while a transgender man simulates a lap dance on a 4-year-old girl. And I'm an extremist. These people are these people are psychopaths. These people are Satanists. And it's like you can barely even say that without people's reaction to it, being, oh, well, it's a conspiracy theory or, oh, to the Illuminati or blah, blah, blah. No. I mean, how overt does it have to get? How blatant do things have to get before we all, not we all, but many of us just step back and go, you know what? How about for a while we suspend the separation of church and state? First off, it was an info war. The separation of church and state was intended to protect the church from the state. It was intended to protect the church from the state, not the state from the church. That's a lie. It's a lie that's been told in your post-World War II democratic liberal order Marxist universities. Bought the churches off, bought the institutions off, bought the Christians off, and we have been bought off. And then we want to talk about a wedge issue like abortion. And don't get me wrong, I think I was very clear in my stance on abortion on Friday, in my conversation with Dr. Scott Jensen, and I'll say it again here. Just from a political and governance standpoint, any precept of human rights and civil rights has to begin with the sanctity of life. if you don't have sanctity of life, there is no real legitimate claim around human rights or civil rights, because how would you have a right to anything? You have a right to play the game. That's how the monopolists would like to lay it out. You have a right to play. You have a right to get a social security number that basically serves as an EIN, right? In a underneath a mega corporation that makes you an individual sole proprietor entity underneath the corporation that is America. But these people are corporatists. They're monopolists. And there are a lot of Republicans that are the same way. There are a lot of Republicans that think of things that, this country as a business, as a corporation. And even that as a scientific innovation. The formation of economy and corporations is a type of science, economic science. It's a way that we organize our society and we try and organize labor. Even that doesn't have to be the net negative that it's become. It doesn't have to be that. Our economy doesn't, all of this stuff, it doesn't have to be that. We can have corporations that are aimed at God's grace and God's glory and charity. We can have an economy that's aimed at those things. And we should strive for that. We can strive for that. But first we're going to have to acknowledge the prevailing wickedness and corruption that's in our society, that's before us, that tries to influence us, that's really just stood up more than any time in history, stood up and walked around unabashed. People are in open rejection of God. Open rejection. Hate. There's a real hate. And they use all these cultural, historical narratives to justify that hate. But really, when you get right down into it and you look at the fundamentals of it, all they're doing is projecting. They're projecting. You hate Christianity. You hate God because the Native Americans were killed by early pilgrims. You hate God because the early Christians took slaves in Africa. You hate God because in the Middle Ages or during the Crusades, the Christians, the Spanish Inquisition, whatever story you're telling. That's why you hate God, really? You think you can fool us with that? You think you can fool me or anybody else with half a brain with that narrative? And what they're relying on is that the vast majority of people are so weak, spiritually, intellectually, philosophically. They're so weak, they can be fooled with that story. This is the story the Marxists told. This is the story that the universities have pushed. I remember learning it in grade school. Slave trade, waged against men and women and children who the white Christian man thought were savages. And they did think they were savages, and there was racism baked into it. But that's not the rejection of God that you guys are hanging your hat on. And I'm not stupid enough to fall for that. I'm not stupid enough not to understand that two things can be true at once. Yes, there were people who used Christianity and God and took the Lord's name in vain to do horrible, unspeakable, unjust, unrighteous things. Of course, that's true. Not only is it true, but it can continue on into the future. It's possible. It's always possible to take the Lord's name in vain, to take God's name in vain and wage unholy, unrighteous wars and to do unholy and unrighteous things. It's not an indictment of God. What a crazy philosophical schism. How can you indict God for the will of man? These are people, and I'm going to tie this together for you because I would, I'm experimenting today with an idea. I'm thinking out loud before the audience here. But I've come to what the point of this is today. When we talk about the will of man, I think I have this intuition that the real rejection of God, the real rejection of the spiritual and faithful, is it's exactly that. I mean, that is where this rejection really wants to stand up and stretch its legs, right? But what we want to do is we want to say, you know what, God, why'd you give us free will? Why? What kind of sick, cruel game is that? And that's what if you look into Satanism and you look into the Satanic Bible or the Satanic Temple or the Church of Satan, or people who are openly, publicly practicing Satanism, you'll hear this referenced often. Is God as a kid on an anthill, right? With a magnifying glass. You see that in some Hollywood motifs that are played out. But that's the real, and the reason why I'm pointing this out today is because we are clearly faced with the question of freedom or not freedom. And the question of freedom or not freedom maps on to this rejection of God and this resentment towards free will itself. This is a fundamental issue that we have to work out. Do we understand the grace of free will? Do we understand the charity in being able to live life, the charity of it in and of itself at bottom, deep down? Do we understand the fundamental charity of life itself? And if we understand that fundamental charity, now we can begin to orient ourselves around a question like abortion. It's a grace to be given the free will to mess up. It's a grace to be given the free will to not make it to heaven based on your decisions. Only a self-absorbed, arrogant mind would look at free will and life and the ability to prove one's love or to find one's faith as some type of rigged game. I mean, this is satanic. That is a very satanic type of worldview. That's the heart of what Satan is doing himself. Satan doesn't believe he's a creature. He can't come to believe he was a creature because he was right there when in the beginning. He was given grace and he was given power. He was given free will. Even in the metaphysical, even in the higher ups of principalities and powers, Satan was given free will from God. So he rejects it. He resents it. He can't come to grips with it. He views it as a slight. I mean, this all goes back to free will. The will of man. We have to clarify that will. But that's what we should strive to do. We put a lot of roadblocks in our way. There's a lot of self-imposed, self-inflicted wounds when it comes to free will. When it comes to and don't get me wrong, free will doesn't operate in a vacuum, right? That's why we're talking about moral hazard. That's why today's episode is moral hazard and the will of man. Because we can create those incentives. Oh, God gave us the ability to be historical. Historicity is another fundamental philosophical principle that you have to understand and come to be grateful for. Because without history, we couldn't be human. I mean, history is what makes us human. The ability to keep track of things, to remember things, to create a historical account so that we can develop and grow. We have that sort of, no other species on the planet records history. We are the historians of existence. Just in that alone. To be able to record history. Just that charity in and of itself should have you drop to your knees and thank God. We get to record existence. But when you're a narcissist, when you're a nepotist, doesn't matter what you would get. You don't believe in the afterlife. You don't believe in the eternal. So all of it seems like something's being done to you. This is where people talk about the victim mentality. Many people look at the world like they're a victim of existence, like they're a victim of the universe. And I don't say that in a corny Republican way, like, oh, stop saying you're a victim of the government. Because a lot of you are being victimized by your government. That's actually a fact. But when you get down to the root, there wouldn't be a circumstance where you wouldn't see yourself as a victim. You see yourself as a victim as a tautology, just as an absolute across the board. In that, your orientation is so off. I mean, you don't have the proper bearings of how to look at the world. And this was done to you. This is the will of man. This is the collective will of man coming down to bear and being a roadblock for the path of righteousness. When you take an institution, or you take public schools, or you take school boards, and you prioritize in premium LGBTQ or gender studies or queer theory or some anti-white historical narrative or whatever the case may be. Even before that, it was STEM. It was let's beat the Russians and the Chinese militarily and scientifically and technologically. When you have that corruption, that lack of faith, that lack of wisdom and discernment that comes with faith, when you have that, there are people in front of you that are going to be incentivized or going to be influenced by that choice. Sin is exponential. Human will is exponential. We see that right now. Our president, Vladimir Putin, President Xi, some other people with nuclear weapons, they were given the will to press a button, nuclear missile, nuclear rockets, nuclear war, kill millions of people, hundreds of thousands of people in an instant. It's the beauty of human will, but it's also very scary. And it can also be the tragedy of human will. And for all these people who are victims, I mean, I can't say how much I resonate with Jordan Peterson's talking about picking up your cross and bearing it. And I think that Jordan is shaky around his fundamental faith in God. But I mean, that's an audacious thing for any man to claim against another man. But I think what Jordan has done, or has tried to do as an intellectual that comes from the universities, is create a rational explanation for Christianity for people who just openly reject God. And I get that. And I hesitate to use how a person delivers a message in public that's that well articulated and sophisticated as Jordan Peterson's is, to make any judgments about his personal faith. But there are a lot of people, and there are a lot of 501c3 Christians out there who want to say, oh, Jordan doesn't affirm Jesus Christ as Lord and Savior and so on and so forth. You know what? This is what I'm talking about. The will of man is a pendulum that swings both ways. Yeah, we got the Satanists over there, and they're dragging people over the line into an abyss. But we still got a lot of 501c3 Christians here who have a very rudimentary and infantile, underdeveloped sense of the greater human existence, circumstance, and the will of man. And this is why I said to Dr. Scott Jensen on Friday, the law on abortion shouldn't even be whether or not abortion is legal or not. The question should be, does the government subsidize abortion? Does the government pay for it? We can't make you love God. We can't make you obey God. We can't make you live a righteous life. We can't make you not engage in sin, because if we do that, we are also trying to supersede God. We're trying to use law and government to supersede free will. This is a slippery slope. This is a dangerous intersection that we're at. Four-way intersection that we're standing at with that question. Now, do I think there shouldn't be any laws? I mean, no, that's extreme, right? And do I think ultimately that any precept of human rights and civil rights must start with the sanctity of life? I do believe that. Do I believe in the final analysis abortion should be outlawed? I do believe that. But if people don't want, I mean, the will of man, if people don't think that that's important, if people don't care about 63 million babies being killed in the womb in 60 years, this is the will of man. And who are we? Who are we as a, in order to uphold a moral and ethic, in order to hold up morals and ethics, in order to hold up integrity, in order to hold up righteousness, in order to hold up justice, the truth, in order to achieve peace, like St. Thomas Aquinas said, man must submit his passions to his reason and his reason to God. But if we're not going to do that, if we fail to do that, it creates a leak. It creates a crack in the wall. It creates a weakness in the dam. And pretty soon that dam is compromised. I don't know if you guys ever seen in the cartoon or any depiction of when a dam breaks down, you'll see the water start to spray from one spot, and then it sprays from another spot and another spot until all of a sudden the entire dam is compromised and the whole thing folds. That's the trajectory we're on in society. So it's not meaningful or fruitful to try and plug one hole at a time. We have to drop down, pray, have faith and discernment, and try and figure out how many holes we can plug at once. And I do think that everybody hung their hat on the abortion issue. And I think there are a couple little issues that get propped up by a media industrial complex that's part of a globalist monopoly for people to bicker back and forth about. I see that. And the reality that we have to face in this country is we call ourselves a Christian nation, and we may have been we were founded on Christian principles and values, but this isn't a Christian nation. Because Christianity is an action. It's not a noun. Christianity requires participation. It requires work. It requires faith. Faith is a verb. It's not a noun. This nation as it stands today is not a Christian nation. And the abortion is a huge part of that, no doubt. But it started well before the abortions. We wanted to go to a level of industry that made living easier, that made living more convenient, that made the ability to constrain wealth and power more convenient, the ability to abnegate your own security, your own individual security and freedom more convenient. The heresy is giving over our freedom to a superstate. Give no human authority absolute power over your life. That's the sin. That's the sin of the Industrial Revolution. Oh, we all get a little bit more warm and cozy and wealthy and fat under the lights, the bright lights of an industrial society. Under the bright, shiny lights of an industrial society, we all make out a little better. A rising tide raises all boats, and it does. But every action has a reaction. Every cause has an effect. And we knew deep down during the Industrial Revolution that we should have put very strict guardrails around scientific innovation and morals and ethics that go alongside it. And we didn't do that. We opted for the easy way. The easy way was to let the science run off with society. And now we've gotten ourselves into a place so far from righteousness, from morality, from ethics, from values, from integrity, from the truth. We've gotten so far from the truth, we're actually using science. We're using science to cut little boys' penises off who we think are actually more like a girl inside. And we're letting 6'4", 220-pound black men dress up as women and give lap dances to 4-year-old toddler girls. And we're calling it science. I mean, can we judge a tree by its fruits? I don't want to judge a book by its cover, but can we judge a tree by its fruits? The fruit on this tree is rotten. The fruit from this tree is rotten. No pun intended. I know we're talking Bible and the garden and the forbidden fruit, but man, what do you want me to say? The fruit from this tree is rotten. Man, I'm not making a broad or a whole condemnation of human history or human existence, because there are these spots along the way where societies and groups of people have tried to organize man's will, man's ambition around righteousness. You can read about it. And it's not just Christians. I think the Buddhists, I see some of the problems with Buddhism. And like AJ shared, and I love when AJ in his episode talked about the Eastern philosophy, and there still being despair when you try and resolve all the suffering of your own doing, right? When you take out the suffering from your own doing, you still have that despair that you have to wrestle with. Yeah, I can meditate, I can have a good schedule, I can, eat the right things, I can, all of that stuff, right? But when it's all gone, the despair is still there. There's only one thing that resolves despair. One thing, one single thing in human existence that resolves despair. Faith. And that's hard for a lot of people to grasp. It's hard for a lot of people to accept. It's hard for a lot of people to embrace. Faith is the only answer to despair. This is the validation of Christianity. This is the validation of God. This is the validation of a church. Before the church, don't get me wrong, the church has its problems. The church has, I love the 501c3 Christians who go, oh, you're a Catholic. Oh, so you follow the Pope. Catholics don't follow the Pope. We follow Christ. The Pope is the vicar. And the vicar still has free will. There have been corrupt popes in the past. There is, in my opinion, a weak pope today. A pope who is given over to this sort of, post-World War II democratic liberal order mindset that says, hey, science should lead society now, not faith. Science must lead. And if science leads, it's a net positive for everybody. We'll get to the faith later on. Once we're secure, once we've crossed it, once we've gotten over the hurdle or the obstacle of the material world, then we'll get back to the faith. And I do think that that his actions or his words show that type of impulse towards the greater society, but also individually, which is antithetical to biblical teaching. It's not an indictment of God. It's not an indictment of Christ. And to be quite frank, it's not an indictment of Catholicism. What the founding fathers did is not an indictment of America. It's not an indictment of the ideals of America. The few flaws of man is not an indictment of man altogether. This is solved by Christianity. This is why you can ask for absolution. This is why you can repent. And this is the sort of backdoor hydra that the anti-God, globalists, atheists, Satan, whatever you want to call them, this is the backdoor hydra that comes with an anti-God society. It's not only that you don't know the grace and the charity and the love of God, or you don't have that hope, or you can't resolve that despair. It's that once you're down that road, you start to believe that there's no coming back. That's a real hydra. That locks you into that position. Now, if you don't believe in God, if you don't believe in the church, if you don't believe in Catholicism, if you don't believe in a sacrament, if you don't believe in the blood and body of Christ, the living sacrament, then how can you be absolved? Once you start sinning, you might as well follow through with it. It's going to be so hard to get back into God's grace and charity. What's the point? That's not what Christians believe. I mean, at every turn, we give a better answer. I don't understand. I don't understand what more you people want from God. At every turn with Christianity, you get a better answer than you get to a point when you sit at home at night and you think about where we're going with it. And you just start to go, man, you people just don't like yourselves. I mean, our society has become a reflection of Satan in that way, in this digital world and social media and all these things that have started to prey on the weakness of man's psychology without faith, without metaphysical, spiritual anchors. All of it becomes a reflection of what Satan is, what he represents. He hates himself. Satan has that self-hatred. We project that, we reflect that, because what more do we really want? We had original sin. God told us not that fruit there. The snake in the garden, don't eat that fruit. Want to do it anyway, knew better. Want to do it anyway. Okay, gave you free will, you did it. Okay, now you got to wait until Christ. Now I have to enter into human society and demonstrate a love of myself, God, so powerful that it will allow for everybody who was waiting in line because of sin, allow everybody to enter the gates, get through the gates of heaven, enter the kingdom through Christ. And after Christ, here I will be upon this rock. Peter, who was the first bishop in Rome, and in that way he was the first pope for all you anti-Catholics out there. The first pope was Peter. In the Bible, upon this rock I will build my church. Peter is another word for rock. The word Peter translates into rock. Upon this rock, not that rock, this one. Upon this rock I will build my church. Peter. Saint Peter. Gives you a church, gave you a living sacrament, came up with an entire structure to be able to absolve you of your sins on a continual basis, laid out plush for us. The whole thing is laid out. It's the will of man. We're corrupt, wicked. Man feared the light because his deeds were evil. I mean, I look at society and go, man, we got it so good. Be grateful. God is so gracious, so gracious to us. And for all you people who are anti-God, go ahead, proceed. What do you want me to convince you? What more could I do to convince you? I mean, let's take all of the faith. Let's take all of the 5,700-year-old oral and written tradition out. Because many people many of these scientism type folks like to do this. Let's just go to the furthest scope possible, the universe itself. You can't go to something from nothing. You cannot arrive at something from nothing. Another scientific principle that was rooted out, a scientific first principle, philosophically, that was rooted out of the common mind and critical thought by a very specific cultural narrative. Darwinism, Big Bang Theory, the list goes on. Evolution. You can't go to something, let alone something intelligent, with intelligent design, from nothing. It can't be done. And so at the outer limits, at the outer fringe of this anti-God movement, you start to see the simulation theory appear. I mean, the lengths you guys will go to deny God is just embarrassing. And you want us to be embarrassed. That's what's really wild. You want me to be embarrassed about being a Christian. Imagine that. You're willing to say that you're living, that you're a non-playable character, because if we're living in a simulation and this is all computer, if this is all a computer simulation, most of you are NPCs. That would map back onto that self-loathing and that self-hatred. You would rather accept that you're an NPC in some digital computer simulation than that there's a living God that created the heavens and the earth. That's strange. That's really strange. I mean, if you just look in the mirror and just ask yourself, why would I want to accept that I'm a non-playable character in a video game, in a computer simulation, instead of that I was chosen. I was chosen by God. God's fingerprint is on me. Self-hatred. Self-hatred. And it shows. It shows in a lot of you. It shows how you treat yourself. Most of us are born looking like our parents, but we die looking like our choices. It shows. Oh, it shows. It shows that you hate yourself. Then you want to project that hate onto me or us or Christians or even worse, God. You want to project your self-hatred onto God. What kind of foolhardy errand is that? I'm not following you. Nope. Go proceed. Go ahead. You go right on ahead. You go right on ahead with your anti-Christian theory and your anti-America theory and your anti-nation theory. You go right on ahead. You walk that path. Go on ahead. I'm not coming with you. Don't pull my arm. I'll slap the taste out of your mouth. I rebuke and refute with conviction. Because one thing you're not going to do is bully me. You're not going to bully me into rejecting God. No. Where I fall short in God's eyes, I'm going to do on my own accord. I'm not willing to follow a bunch of goofballs into an anti-God lifestyle. No, not doing it. And a lot of you are following a lot of people who are willing to accept this anti-God lifestyle. The will of man, the exponential will of man, the exponential nature of sin, the socialization of sin, the digitalization of sin, sin on demand, sin writ large. It could be drugs, it could be porn, it could just be lying, just lies themselves. I mean, the lies are outrageous. We become more accepting of the lies than we are of Christ. Why? What did Christ do to you? I mean, think of it. The animus towards Christ. Again, I'll go back to it. You want to say that it's what Christians have done. You get all these people who defect from the church because their dad was a pastor, or their dad was a priest, or they were sexually abused in the church, or they were ostracized for being homosexual, or the woman I wanted to marry came from another denomination, and then my family treated me poorly because I wanted to. But all of that stuff is just whining and complaining. That's just narcissism. You're going to blame Christ for the will of man. You're going to blame God for the will of man. If that's the story you want to tell yourself, then fine. I mean, I get it. I'm just not following you. And I think for all of us Christians out there, all of us people who do believe in God, who believe in having a country, who believe in goodness as an idea, as an axiomatic idea, as a possibility, as a potentiality for the human existence and for the human condition, who understand that only faith can resolve despair, that only faith can get rid of angst. No, can't get rid of, can appease angst. For those of us who believe that, can we start to act like it? Can we stop watching Fox News, pretending like the Murdochs are Christians? Can we stop watching Fox News, pretending that Sean Hannity is some Christian thought leader? Can we be serious? Can we be serious about ministry? Can we be serious about a ministry of truth into the belly of the beast? All this flee to the red states, balkanize, secede from the union. Are you kidding me? Are you kidding me? You want to secede from the union? Give me a break. You want to get out of picking up a cross heavy enough and bearing it well enough with enough faith to change the biggest scope of things that you possibly can as an individual through power and brotherhood and fellowship with other Christians. That's what you want to get out of. And I get why. Because you look out through your television set at Fox News and then you go outside and you think $32 trillion. Where is it? Where did it go? Where's the $32 trillion? For $32 trillion of national debt, your cities should look like Shangri-La. Your people should be out in the streets enjoying the fruits of such a prosperity as that. But they're not. You don't see them anywhere. They're in their homes. They're more disconnected than ever. They've been run into their little box, their little cave like rats, hiding. Man feared the light because his deeds were evil. Come outside. Come outside. Let's get out there. Let's go testify. Let's go ministry. Let's go worship. What are we waiting on? Oh, well, just the end times now. Jesus is coming. Jesus is coming. You don't know. You don't know that. 1,000 years of Christendom. You guys aren't even in the right realm when it comes to the scripture of Revelation. You're doing the same thing the liberals are doing. You're passing around memes. You're passing around memes and quotes and little pickpockets of the Bible. The Bible not a la carte. We're trying to match the speed of science and the speed of social media by, picking the Bible a la carte. Don't work like that. Only when all the Jews, I believe this is what this is what it says. Only when all of us are in communion together can the Messiah come. At least that's what the Jews believe. It's what many of the Jews believe. That's what they used to believe. A lot of anti-Jews, a lot of anti-Christians. You're LARPing. And I don't mean to get down on you, You don't have to listen to this. You don't have to watch. You can unsubscribe. I'm not here for the unfaithful. I'm not really here for 1 million followers. I'm just here. I just want like 25,000 soldiers. Because man's will has exponential potential. The will of man has an exponential potential. Get 10,000 citizens, get 10,000 faithful and hopeful citizens together, and you could change anything. Now 20,000, now 30,000, now 50,000. And I'm not talking about 50,000 LARPy citizens that go to their Republican BPOU for coffee and donuts and social hour, and then talk about the latest Fox News headline and reaffirm each other's positions about it. I'm talking about 10, 20, 30,000 real hitters. 10, 20, 30,000 Steve Bannons. I have not yet begun to fight. Soldiers. That's what we need now. Christian soldiers. We need an army of Christian soldiers. This has been another episode of Please Call Me Crazy, brought to you by Free People Radio. I'm your host, Royce White. We are here at Free People Radio in the belly of the beast, Minneapolis, Minnesota. The will of man, moral hazard, and the will of man. On Wednesday, we may have another guest episode, a surprise guest episode, depending on how the week develops. We may throw another episode in there this week on a Thursday. I can't say for sure. This thing is moving fast. We got a lot of people who want to join in the conversation, and we want to let them join in the conversation because they have a lot of great insights and other things to contribute. Friday, as usual, will be our family and friends guest episode, but we'll see how this week goes. Stay tuned. As I said earlier in the podcast or in the beginning, we are available on all audio platforms: Apple, Spotify, Amazon, Google, iHeartRadio, as well as obviously our YouTube premiere at 9 p.m. Central, Monday, Wednesday, Friday, and Rumble as well. Twitch in the works, Odyssey in the works. All the episodes are backed up on BitChute in case we encounter unforeseeable censorship from YouTube or any other big tech platform. I hope you enjoyed the show today. I look forward to seeing you Wednesday night. Keep faith alive. Walk forward with God. One with God is a majority. One with truth is a majority. The fight continues. Godspeed.